Welcome to the Student Astronaut Challenge 2020 Coaches Training discussion of common flight simulator issues. These are some issues that we have noticed during the many years of running the competition that some teams run into, and it can be experienced teams or inexperienced teams. So you just want to review them so that you'll be aware of them and try to avoid doing them either in practice or during competition. Most of the items, while they are not in any particular order, they do deal with telemetry, data points, and communication. So the key things in that are to use familiar data points. So if you don't know where a data point is, you shouldn't use it. And if you do use it, your teammates may ask you for it. And that's fine. If they don't know where the data point is, you can point out to where the location is, such as if you're checking the hydraulic accumulation pressure, you could say that's on the flight engineer data panels in the APU/hydraulic panel, and the name of the item is ACCUM space P. That gives them a specific reference to where to locate the data point so they can confirm that it matches what you've asked for. That is always perfectly acceptable. There's no points off for telling them where it is. In fact, if you use data points that they don't know and they just skip it because they don't know it, that is bad. So keep in mind, try and use ones you've practiced with, ones you're familiar with. Now, on the same idea there, check many different telemetry data points. Don't be repetitive. There are some you will keep going back to, such as oxygen, or carbon dioxide levels. Those are kind of critical to the flight, and those are in the environmentals on the pilot's data panels. But also make sure you mix it up. Something that I use important ones like during launch, from liftoff to SRB jettison to MECO, main engine cutoff. Fuel status is important. So you can always check the fuel status of the solid rocket boosters, the SRBs. You can also check the fuel status of the external tank. Just don't check a data point that no longer exists. So once the solid rocket boosters have been jettisoned, stop checking the solid rocket boosters for any data points because they don't exist. Another thing is to use the correct name for the data point, the correct name for the switch. An example of that is you'll find lots of times you'll see a data point relating to CIRC, or switches for CIRC. That stands for circulation, not circular. There is a list of common abbreviations contained in the Shuttle Communications Guidelines 2018 manual that's located on the website in the Flight Simulation Documentation section. So just review that. You'll find that such as HYD, HYD. Many teams refer to that as hydrogen. It's actually hydraulic. Hydrogen is H2, as you know. It's easy to get mixed up, so just think about it and work with them. You can always just stick with the abbreviation. You can say, what's the HYD pressure or what's the HYD pressure instead of hydraulic. It's whatever you're used to. One thing you should try and prevent is dead air. If you want to know what dead air is, it's this. That was 5 seconds of dead air. Dead air means there's absolutely no conversation, no sound going back and forth. Now, that probably seemed like more than 5 seconds, but that's because dead air is very frightening in a flight simulation type environment or in a flight environment, because you don't know if that means you've lost all communications or just no one's talking. So while you don't want to have continuous conversation, you definitely don't want to go, 30 seconds, 45 seconds, a minute without any conversation going on between the flight crew and mission control. The other thing that I've pointed out that I would address is in mission control and also in the flight simulation crew, the flight crew, when you are verifying a data point, a telemetry point, it's really good to point it out on the screen so the other people working with you know that you have seen it and that what you're responding with is the actual value at that time. So that's another point is with telemetry, you should respond with the discrete value of the data point if it has one. If it has an on or an off condition, you can say on or off or nominal because that's understandable. But like if you're checking the hydraulic accumulation pressure, there happen to be three systems. You should check all three. You would just say that's, like in this example, it's 2016, 2016, 2016. That tells everybody the value of each of the three systems for the hydraulic pressure. Continuing on, levity and humor is acceptable, and quite often it helps break the tense in nature that you might run into in different scenarios, particularly when you're doing emergency scenarios. But don't go overboard with it. Keep it to a minimum. You want to act professional. In fact, we use the team's professionalism as some of our scoring criteria. So just remember that. Some humor is acceptable, and quite often we appreciate it as well as y'all do. Um, when you are having an emergency and you have resolved an emergency, the first thing you should do after that, instead of going directly back to where you were in the flight, you should have a discussion as to whether you should abort the flight or continue the flight. You should also give your rationale for that. Everybody on the flight teams, which is mission control and the flight crew, can voice opinions and rationale for the decisions. However, the ultimate decision will come down to recommendations by mission control and either acceptance or denial by the mission commander. So the mission commander has the overall final say. Another thing concerning that is if you realize that an error has been made, a data point has been missed, the data point information coming back was not correct, don't be tentative. Speak up. Point out the error that was made so it can be corrected. If you correct it at the time, it's great. That's what you want to do. That's the purpose of everybody watching everybody else and realizing what data you're checking. The real problem is if you realize that there was an error and you don't say anything. Later on, that error could cause an emergency that could abort your flight. So make sure you speak up if you recognize an error and get it straightened out. Another thing that's very good to do is to understand the range of values for systems that a data point would have. The term nominal means, yes, the data point is within a nominal range. A nominal is not a specific value, such as hydraulic pressure. The normal or nominal values for hydraulic pressure can range anywhere from 3,000 psi up to 3,200 psi. Now, it can go higher than that and still be okay, but it's something you want to look at. It can go lower than that. It depends on how much equipment is in use at the time using hydraulics. However, if you're expecting it to be, 3,100 and you look down and it's 1,500, you know there's a problem and that is not a nominal value. Same thing as if it's very high. So just get an idea so you have an idea of the range of nominal. And speaking of nominal can be an acceptable response to telemetry checks sometimes. But if it's a discrete data point like hydraulic pressure, fuel quantity, APU speed percent, those have specific values that show up on the data panels, and you should use the data panel value so that both sides know they're seeing the same thing and the information is correct. Another big general observation is to be very consistent with the communication format. NASA has developed a communication format. We have a slide presentation on that as part of coaches training that you should definitely review and work with your team so that they follow it. Briefly, it's 3 steps. Who you are talking to, who is talking, and what you want. So just remember that. Who am I talking to? You say that first. Who am I that's talking? You say that. And then what do I want? So that's the communication format, and that's what you need to make sure that you follow so that everybody knows, that are you talking to me or are you talking to somebody else, and what are you looking for? Okay, now I'm going to address some issues that generally occur with the flight crew. That's the mission commander, the pilot, and the flight engineer. And these can happen to anybody in the sim, and it's things that you should watch out for and make sure you don't do. For the flight engineer, be very cautious and attentive to the checklist time block. The checklist, until you get a little farther in the mission where it says mission dependent, they each have a time block assigned to them. So make sure you do not get ahead of that checklist. If you finish the items in the checklist within the minute or 2-minute time block and you haven't reached the next time block, fine. Do telemetry checks, verify your switch settings, get ready for the next one, but don't do any commands for the next time block until its time comes up. So when you're, pre-launch T-minus 3 minutes, you'll have a few things to do in that minute time block. You may finish that in 30 seconds. So then you have to wait until T-minus 2 minutes to start the next time block. So make sure you stay within the checklist time block. I've addressed this before with data points. You can do the same thing as switches. Simulator crew, you need to make sure you know your switch locations. This is mainly the pilot and the mission commander because they have the majority of them. However, the flight engineer has 2 or 3 very important switch settings that they have to know where the switches are so they can execute them quickly. Just review the schematics, review the templates for the switches so that you know right off where they are and can flip them in a timely manner. For the pilot and the mission commander, make sure you pay attention to the flight engineers. They read the checklist and do what they ask. They're asking for specific things at specific times, so don't ignore them or don't just go, oh, I know what that should be, and go ahead and do it ahead of time. For the flight engineer, at T-minus 4 minutes, you need to make absolutely certain you initiate the radar. That times the flight engineer data points and data screens to the launch. So if you miss the T-minus 4 minute start, then your timings are off. For the mission commander, make sure you execute the launch command exactly at T-minus 4 seconds. Mission control should give you a countdown for that so that you know when it's coming, but make sure you execute at T-minus 4 seconds. Another big item for the flight crew is what we call the gauntlet. It's the T+9 minute to T+11 minute time frame in the checklist, and there is a significant amount of switch settings and data that needs to be handled during that 2-minute block. You have to practice that a lot to get it all done within the 2 minutes. So you can, kind of at MECO's, 8 minutes, you have an 8-minute warning, you have an 8-minute 40 MECO, roughly, give or take, depends on each flight. You have some time to get yourself ready for it. As soon as you get the go for T+9 minutes, you start and you keep going and you get it done. That's the one time you can ignore the time block time, though most of those time blocks are only like 15 seconds long. So once you start that, you keep going until you finish the 11-minute block. Flight mission commander, a problem that we quite often see with the mission commander is they fail to follow the deorbit burn procedure as given to them by mission control because they feel like they know it well enough to do it. And that may be, but part of mission control is they're going to give you the actual time duration for the burn, and it can change. So don't second guess them and do it on your own. Mission commander, again, landing. When you're landing, and this is all down to practice, you need to make sure you avoid a hard landing. That's when you hear the thud instead of the squeak of the tires. Obviously, if you don't make it to the runway, that's not good. And if you go off the runway, that's not good. So those are 3 of the things that we look for specifically, along with the general way you handle the simulator, the shuttle in the simulator. Telemetry checking should always be done between the flight crew and mission control, or mission control and the flight crew. It can be initiated from either side, but don't verify within your own group. So, it's like the flight engineer should not say, pilot, what's the value for hydraulic accumulation pressure? Because you're both looking at the exact same screens, and mission control could have a different value and you never know it. So always make sure you're checking with the other half of your team. And both sides can initiate telemetry. It's fine, whichever side initiates it, and you can switch back and forth. It doesn't have to always be initiated by one side or the other. Another mission commander item is that for manual prograde, you will be flying the simulator manually. You will be setting yourself up in a prograde situation. This is shortly after MECO and the OMS burn. To make sure you know exactly what it looks like, you have two ways to check it. You can look in the landing manual, which is on the website, and see what the orbiter screen looks like at automatic prograde. Or you can simply bring orbiter up, launch into orbit, and then press the prograde command and see what it looks like so that you can match it when you are manually flying it. And those are two great ways to learn how the prograde should look from once Mission Commander finishes it. Now I want to turn to some common problems that Mission Control may encounter. First thing is being inconsistent on calling the T-minus minute marks, and in addition, the T-plus minute marks. As I said before, at one point after MECO and after the OMS burn, you'll see the time goes from a specific time to mission dependent. At that point, there is no specific time for each time block. Up to that point, you'll see each time block has a T-minus minutes or a T-plus minutes mark as to when that block should start. Mission Control, specifically the mission director, should be calling out those T-minus and T-plus minute marks. Another big item that Mission Control sometimes will miss is they won't do a 10-second countdown to launch. It's just kind of automatically should always do a 10-second countdown when some burn is going to occur. So you would simply do, at T-minus 10 seconds, you'd start T-minus 10, 9, 8, etc. And in that same thread, don't miss the T-minus 4-minute execute command that the mission commander is doing to launch the orbiter. You should verify and confirm that occurs at T-minus 4. You might want to give the commander a reminder before you start the 10-second countdown. So at T-minus 15 seconds, you might just remind the commander, okay, T-minus 4, make sure you execute. Mission Controls is responsible for starting the mission elapsed time clock. That's also known as the count up clock. From once it starts, everything is T plus. There's a button in the orbiter. There's a button that you press to start it. When you're practicing, you can use a watch or you can use a timer or anything, but get in the habit of specifically starting a mission elapsed time clock at T-minus 0. Same thing that like the flight engineer, don't get ahead of the checklist. Mission Control, make sure you don't get ahead of the checklist, because there's lots of times in the checklist, Mission Control has items that they call out and they either need a confirmation back or they're just stating the data. Make sure you do it within the proper time block. Also, don't call events before they occur. Some of the items that are being done by the orbiter take time, such as the manual prograde. Don't give them the permission to do the manual prograde and then immediately say, oh, manual prograde complete, because it's not. Your mission commander is flying it, and it may take 45 seconds, a minute, maybe even a little longer to get that done. So make sure you wait until the event completes before you confirm that it is completed. In the same line, don't confirm 0 up manual prograde when it hasn't occurred yet. So just make sure you're paying attention and understand how long it takes some of these things to take. Like there's 2 times in the flight, you'll do a retrograde, or the mission commander will execute an automatic retrograde, which turns the shuttle around so that the OMS engines are facing the direction of travel. This is to slow down for the deorbit. Make sure you let the orbiter finish that reorientation before you say, oh, retrograde complete. The other thing is make sure you follow the deorbit burn process. This will normally be handled by the mission director in Mission Control. Could be assigned to one of the other mission controllers, but the process is to announce the length of the deorbit burn, give a 10-second countdown to when burn commences, give a 10-second countdown to when burn will terminate, and then verify that burn did indeed terminate and the process is therefore complete. So make sure you follow those steps. Give them the burn length, give them the 10-second countdown to start the burn, 10-second countdown to terminate the burn, and then verify that the burn is complete. Landing is an important item for everybody, obviously, but for mission control, you've got two different parts of that. You should always call out altitude and ground speed as a pair of data points. Altitude is in kilometers, ground speed is in meters per second. Normally, what we do is we recommend you call altitude. Altitude is 10K, ground speed 400. They know that the ground speed's in meters per second, so you can save some time by not saying meters per second. But make sure you do that. The recommended time frame is if you're above 10K in altitude, then we recommend that you call it out every 5,000 meters. If you're below that, we recommend you call it out every 1,000 meters. So, and then that way, that just keeps the mission commander who is manually flying not having to constantly move his eye or her eyes to look for altitude and airspeed. Now, you'll notice in the landing checklist that there are only a couple of specific altitudes that have check blocks or checklist blocks. Those specific ones should be done by the mission director because they are specific to other events occurring. All the ones in between should be handled by Mission Controller 1 or Mission Control or Mission Controller 2. A big hint, on the pilot's panel, there's a box that's outlined in blue. That data that's displayed in that box is generally current to the time for that mission. So it's a real-time display. Those are great telemetry data points to check, and always glance at that to make sure when something comes up, you know that it's coming up at the right time. And then the last thing that we've talked about already is make sure you monitor fuel status. That's obviously important for the launch. You could monitor it once you're in orbit to make sure you don't burn too much OMS or too much RCS fuel, but that's rarely ever an issue unless there's a leak or something. So just monitor the fuel status on the launch for SRBs and ETs, and then once the SRBs are jettisoned and then the ET, you can stop monitoring the fuel status. So these are just some common issues that we see repeatedly occur during competition. So we're hoping that by bringing them to your attention, you'll be able to train them out of your habit and not encounter many or any of them, and that way you'll have a much better flight. So take care and good luck.